and transformation strategies that we have used here in Vermont. So first of all, what is court docket data? Well, essentially, it's the records that the courts use to document who they're seeing, what those charges might be, the dispositions, that is to say, what happens to those cases. Are they found not guilty? Are they guilty? Are they dismissed? And what are the sentences that typically are meted out in particular cases? So typically, when I talk about court docket data, I mean all the activity that's related to a case is recorded in this type of data. So here is a court docket sheet from Vermont Superior Court. And you'll notice that this sheet has the court docket number, the unique number assigned to this particular case. It has the prosecuting attorney, the defendant's date of birth, their place of birth. Tells us a little bit about what this case is about. This is a simple assault. It's a misdemeanor. On this date, the defendant was found guilty by the court. And then here we have a lot of information about the specifics on this case. For example, the defendant pled not guilty and then subsequently decided to plead guilty, I guess. But all of this information is available in the court's MIS. Some of it's coded and some of it's free text. Typically, we concern ourselves with the data that is coded. So let's go to dessert. How can you use court docket data? Well, our experience is that you can use it for such things as answering the question, what's the going rate for this or that particular charge? And I think probably we use our database of court docket information more than anything else to answer that question. We get that question from the courts, that is to say the presiding judge, from a prosecuting attorney for a defense attorney. They're negotiating a plea and they want to get an idea what the going rate is on a statewide basis. Another product that we develop frequently are analyses of sentencing practices throughout the state. We use this data for policy and planning types of research. We use it for throughput analysis, and I'll give you a screenshot of that in a moment. Time series analysis, program evaluations. This has been very helpful for looking at whether or not programs have made changes or differences in the way the criminal justice system is running. And we use it for disproportional minority contact, which is a major contract that we have on a yearly basis with our Department of Children and Family Services that's required of anybody who receives juvenile justice and delinquency. So what I'll do is I'll run through a quick sample of each of these so you can kind of get the flavor. Here's a going rate for the crime of burglary. So as I say, an attorney is going to call us and say, what's a typical sentence for this particular crime? And what they're interested in is the minimum sentence and the maximum sentence. And typically they want to know this information for persons sentenced straight time versus split time, which in Vermont is a brief period of incarceration followed by probation. And so what we do here is for both the minimum and the maximum, we give them the mean, the median, and the mode. And for split sentences, we can give them the typical days to serve that are on that sentence. So what we have found is that we can generate this very quickly, but it has a lot of impact. A lot of people really know us as a result of this, the going rate type of model. We also use this data for sentencing practices. This is an excerpt from a project that we're doing for the legislature on race and sentencing in Vermont. What we're seeing here is by looking at the sentencing data, we can determine, and we run the numbers on this, that race is correlated with incarceration, showing that African Americans in the red bar are much more likely to be incarcerated than are whites. We also support legislative hearings. Currently in Vermont, we are looking at the question of whether or not marijuana should be decriminalized, and so the legislature was interested in sentencing outcomes by county. So this is an added feature that you can use with this data, and what was the outcome of these particular convictions. And as you can see, just quickly, as you're looking from county to county, there's really a variation in the way those jurisdictions do business. We also had talked the court into providing us access to the juvenile docket. So let me show you a little example of what we're doing with this. We put this data on our website. So these area maps, I think, are very useful, but I think most people have a difficulty understanding them. So what we've been working with is some interactive products. I'm going to unload this, unpack this a little bit, and show you how it works. Let's say, for example, that we're interested in the number of juvenile cases that are dismissed because they have satisfactorily completed diversion. So by clicking on this toggle, we see immediately, in a very, very graphic sort of way, that there's terrific variation between the counties, as indicated here, and the percentage of charges that are handled. And one of the things that's a bit of a mystery here is Washington County, which is where the capital of our state is, Montpelier, using this in a very, very small percentage of their cases. So, well, what are they doing? Do they refer cases to diversion and then they are failed, and so as a consequence they file a delinquency petition? Well, let's click on this. We see that that doesn't make much of a difference. Are they finding delinquencies without diversion? Let's see what this looks like. Well, yes, it does. So 31% of their cases are handled in a delinquency prosecution without diversion, but it still does not account for much. Are they dismissing these cases? Oh, I see. Yes, they are. More than almost 60% of their juvenile petitions are dismissed. So this is kind of an interesting product that we use on our website to help the data look a little more interactive. And by the same token, it demonstrates how you can use docket information in order to look at juvenile delinquency policies around the state. We use these throughput analyses quite frequently. They're a very nice sort of non-statistical way that you can give people a handle on what's going on in their jurisdiction. So this is for DUI. We're looking at final charges, how many are dismissed by the court, how many dismissed by the prosecutor, and then as they move, how many go to trial, how many are pled, how many people end up in prison, and so forth, based upon 2,500 charges. And again, this is a format I think that works good for non-statisticians. We can do time analysis. In this graph, the light blue are an innovative program for domestic violence. The red is the traditional district court. The question was, are they handling their cases more quickly? So this is the question, how long did it take you to dispose this case? Less than a week, 1 to 3 weeks. And as we can see, we got a lot of blue up front, and as these cases drag on and on and on, we have many more cases that the district court is dealing and is indicating that it's taking them much longer to dispose of their cases. You can also do annual time series analysis. This is motor vehicle trends over a number of different years. So we're looking at 3 or 4 charges and convictions on the same chart. Everything stays reasonably the same except BLS, and I actually think that this was a change in the statute that reduced the number of criminal DLS charges. We have been successful using court data for program evaluations. In this particular project, we are evaluating special investigation units, which are special police units that are designed to investigate child sexual crime and adult rape. And their objective is to bring better cases to the court. And so one of the questions we want to ask is, looking at the number of child sex crimes you're bringing, how many of them end in a conviction for a child sex crime as opposed to a reduction to an assault or something like this? The pre-SIUs is turquoise, the post is blue, and as you can see, this is not going very well for the SIUs except for Rutland, where they increase the percentage of cases. Disproportionate minority contact, again, we're using this court docket information to tell us difference rates between the experience that white youth versus minority youth have with the court. And these that are highlighted in red are areas where there is a lot of disparity. The yellows also indicate some disparity, but less. And unfortunately, as you see, persons of color are receiving a whole lot more punitive types of sentencing than whites. Okay, so if any of that rang true, if any of that seemed to be such that you thought it was possibly of interest to you and you might want to become involved with this, let's talk about some strategies that we've used in the past to obtain court data. The first thing I would recommend is to do some homework in your jurisdiction to determine the details of how your court is organized. Do you have a unified court system? Do you have county fiefdoms? Who really has the authority? Is it the judge? Is it the court administrator? I think it's important to know something about the court MIS system. Is it a legacy system? Is it a new platform? Does it have a lot of capability? And this is going to sort of either facilitate or cause some obstacles for your ability to get this data. It's always useful to know whether the data you're requesting is going to be subject to the public record law. It may be free, or excuse me, it may be available, but is it free? You know, in many states, the court will make this data available to you, but they're going to charge you. So you might be prepared to have to pay a fee. I think it's also important to know how much work is actually going to be involved for the court. If they have a legacy system, limited staff, and very little interest in evidence-based practices, you know, this is going to be an uphill battle in terms of obtaining this information. We also used with great success the trusted partner concept, where we basically suggested to the court, let's do a win-win situation here. We can do a lot of analysis for you, such as that going rate data that I showed you a moment ago, in exchange for your data. And we found actually that starting out in this way has resulted in a number of contracts over the years with the court. They see us as their partner as opposed to some other agency. I think it's also very useful to propose a high bang for the buck type of proposal, meaning that the court generates one abstract, but many users use it. So in Vermont, this extract that we use is also used by the Department of Motor Vehicles, the Department of Corrections, and the Vermont Crime Information Center, which is the state repository. So it's one abstract, lots of use. I think before you get too far into this, it's useful to know what data fields that you want, how you want to get it. Do you want it in an Excel spreadsheet? Do you want it in comment delimited? Do you want it in XML? How often do you want it? We get it once a month, but once a quarter may work for you, or even once every 6 months when you first start out. And it's very important to understand how you're going to protect that data. Any of you who've done the IRB route knows pretty much what sort of things need to be done in order to make sure your data is secure. Also very useful to be flexible. When we first started out, we said to the court, we'd like the criminal docket, the family docket, and the juvenile docket. And they said, yes, no, no. And there'd be no further discussion on that. We also said, by way of fields, we'd really like to get the presiding judge in a particular case as part of the data fields. That wasn't going to fly either, no surprise. Over the years, we have gotten access to all of those dockets, but we're still not getting the judges, and I doubt that that's ever going to happen. So be flexible and be willing to start small. If you're dealing with the court, you're dealing with attorneys, so be prepared to sign an MOU, which will probably be pretty detailed, and you may have a hand in writing it, and you may not. And then finally, excuse me, I would develop a strong relationship with the court's IT staff. Many of those folks are sort of frustrated researchers. And so what we did was develop a partnership with them whereby they attended our staff meetings, they came to our trainings, they did presentations for us, and so we really were much more collegial with them than sort of the typical interagency issues that sometimes arise. Because if the court staff is not in support of your proposal, they can be pretty passive-aggressive in terms of getting what you want. So important data fields to think about. The docket number, which is the unique number that describes that case, very important. Also agency case numbers. So if there's a prosecutor's number or a police number, I would strongly recommend getting those numbers, because what those numbers will do is they will help you match when you go to other agencies for their data. Defendant data, get as much as you can. Names, dates of birth, state identification numbers, demographics. All of this is very helpful in terms of linking persons' records together within this database. And for the descriptive demographics, there's lots of research that you can just generate out of gender discrimination, race, age, and so forth, as I've showed you some examples. Dates are really important, again, for matching. When you get charges, keep in mind that you need the arraignment charge and you need the final disposition. Given that 90% of cases are handled by plea, it's important to get that final charge so that you know how the case was, how it ended up. We also use the disposition data quite extensively. Was the case ended in a dismissal or conviction? Sentencing data. It's important to know where the person went in the sense of incarceration versus probation, but it's also important to know minimum and maximum sentences if you can get that data. So let me wrap up with a quick discussion, high-level discussion about how we handle the data in Vermont. It's been pretty successful, and we really haven't made many changes to the strategy for many years. What first happens is the court runs a script that they develop, which extracts the data, which is used by all of these other agencies. They do this for us once a month. They then load that data on their FTP site. They'll log into that FTP site. It's a secure site. We go in and we pick that up, and very importantly, we download it to a staging database. We never load it directly into our production database. And in the staging database, we use SPSS exclusively to do this data manipulation. Once we get it into SPSS, we look for quality control problems with the data. When you first start off, it's probably sufficient just to kind of get a handle on, did the file come through in one piece? Did it drop cases? And you can look at your docket numbers and look for sequencing. When you get into SPSS, is it scrambled? Is there big pieces of data missing? And as you get more experience with this, you'll be able to figure out bad sentences because, you know, somebody went to jail for 5 years on a misdemeanor. You know, something happened there. So you can move ahead with that. Once we do the quality control checks, then we add value to the data by creating new variables and recoding data. So for example, we have date of birth. So what we do is we create the age of the defendant at the arraignment or the age of the defendant at the disposition, and then we recode those into groups. So we have an under 18, a 19 to 23, or whatever you want to do. So we add value to the data, and once that's done, we then slam it into our production database, where it is then ready for various types of analysis. So that's a pretty fast overview of this, but I'm hoping that I gave you some things to think about. I know that you could send a question by chat to Stan, and we'll take a little break before we move on to Mark's presentation. If you want to contact me offline, you can reach me at this information. So Stan, I guess we're ready for questions.
If you do have questions for Max, please send me a chat and let me know. Max, I have a question for you, which is about the quality issue, and I think you made some good comments. I'm wondering what you have found when you've actually looked at at the data in terms of some of the quality issues, particularly the completeness of the data and that dispositional data. We're so used to missing dispositions in, for example, our criminal history data. I assume that that's not as big a problem with this kind of data, but I'm wondering what specific kinds of things you found.
You know, this is going to be a boring story, Stan, but the quality of this data is excellent. We do more intensive data quality checks on it, and generally it is really once in a while somebody will, you know, have fat fingers and type something wrong, but generally it's very good quality. In terms of dispositions, because this is coming right out of the courts database, there's 100% disposition reporting. So in some senses, we can do better research on recidivism by linking people within that database because of the 100% disposition reporting than we can by going to the Vermont Crime Information Center, which maintains the rap sheet collection. The other advantage to us is that we have a unified court system and they are all on the same software product. So we don't have to worry about collecting data on a county-by-county basis. But if you were to have to do that, that's not a deal breaker. You know, it's just a little bit more labor-intensive in terms of your analysis and data collection.
Okay, thanks, Max. Seeing no other questions at the moment, if you do have questions for Max, you know, feel free to send your questions on to me, and we'll get them at the end. Thank you very much. Before we turn to Mark, I just wanted to mention a couple of things. First of all, this is the first time we're doing the webinar, and each of the three of us are in 3 different locations. So we appreciate your patience as we try to coordinate the sound and the video and so forth. And secondly, for those of you who needed passwords to log on, we apologize for that. We did not send the password because we did not think you would need a password. So we were surprised to learn that you needed it, and that's why you searched in vain for one in your email. So I apologize for the confusion. We'll try to work that out for next time. Our second presenter this afternoon is Mark Myrent from the Illinois SAC. And Mark's going to talk a little bit about the way the SAC uses criminal history and corrections data. For those of you who don't know, Mark has been a long-time member of the Illinois SAC. I believe he strayed from the fold for a little while, but has been back for a while and is now the SAC Director. And we're going to hear from Mark right now, I hope. Mark, are you there? There he is. Can you hear him?
Hear me? Okay, sounds like we're in good shape, so let's get started. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts with you on using administrative records. I think this presentation will complement Max's presentation nicely. I'm going to talk a bit more specifically about some of the technical aspects of utilizing administrative records, and in particular, I want to talk about the record matching process because we've been able to make some significant gains by utilizing a merged version of our corrections data and our criminal history data. And I want to focus on that merging process today and talk about how we were able to create a tool that we can now use for retrospective and prospective analysis of correctional populations. And I want to just give a quick tip of the cap to our staff member, Mark Powers. He's our staff mathematician and has been the one really doing a lot of the heavy lifting on this. So why are we doing this? Well, we're really trying to address some key policy issues, and they're probably not all that different from some of the policy issues that you are wrestling with in your own states. We are looking at issues of prison overcrowding and prisoner reentry. So when we talk about prison overcrowding, this is where we'd like to be able to look retrospectively at what persons coming into prison have accomplished in terms of their full body of work, if you will, rather than just focusing in on their presenting offense that they're convicted of coming into prison. When we talk about reentry, we'd like to look prospectively at what sort of recidivism patterns we're seeing of different types of offenders. And we need to do this because we don't have existing statistical systems that can answer those kinds of questions. We don't have an offender-based tracking system. Now, our criminal history system does accept corrections, admissions, and exits data, but it's really insufficient. A lot of the data that should be there is missing. Even if it was there, there's a fair amount of richness to our corrections data that we'd really like to avail ourselves of, even if we were able to access admissions and exit information. They can tell us, for example, whether admissions were for a new court admission or for a technical violation, whether someone is achieving good time during their prison stay. So to start, we really want to be able to define the corrections population and the data fields of interest. And we're really talking about corrections, admissions, and releases is our area of interest. Now, the first question you might have, we're going to be merging corrections data with criminal history. Why do we make the decision to start with our corrections data? And the reason is really that initially it's the target of interest for our policy questions when we talk about reentry, we talk about prison crowding. Moreover, it really happens to be in Illinois the more accurate data set. So in terms of building our foundation for this merged record, we want to start with where we have more confidence. It's a guaranteed census of admissions and exits. And really, the other point is that each Department of Corrections record, we feel pretty confident is going to have a corresponding criminal history record, but it's not necessarily the same thing in reverse. And the idea is that we're going to build this on person event dates. What that means is that the primary base of that record is for a person, a specific date that they were either admitted to corrections or released from corrections. So when we combine the two data sets, we're going to be able to use that as our anchor. So for example, a person who's a new court admission on a particular date, we're going to be able to look at all the criminal history data prior to that date to get an idea of what they had done beside the committing offense. In selecting the data, the one piece of advice is to try to get as much detail as you can initially, because when you conduct your analyses later on, it's much easier to aggregate up than to try to capture detail that you didn't get initially. So for example, when we talk about looking at prior arrest charges for a person in prison, if we have the statutory charges, it's easy enough to later on aggregate up to person, property offenses, drug offenses, etc. So these are some of the primary data fields that we're pulling from the corrections data set. And we started with county and year so that users can examine their own county's admissions and exits for a given time frame. This data field down here, the question of whether we are able to match to a criminal history record or not, yes or no, is very important. When we start aggregating this information up, we're going to need to be able to know how many matches we have so that we have a valid N. if we're going to be asking, for example, the percentage of those admitted to prison on burglary who are rearrested for a violent crime, we want to know that we're basing that percentage on the numbers that we actually have criminal history for. So every person event date is in there from 1989 on, and that's the base of the record with these various data fields. So to formulate the data tables and linkages, we need to really understand the record keys and how the criminal justice events relate to one another. The keys are what we'll be using to link individuals in both of the databases. And we need to know what are the one-to-one relationships and one-to-many relationships for structuring this into a database. So, for example, when we talk about linking our prison records to our criminal history records, we're hoping for a one-to-one match between our DOC key and our criminal history key, the state ID, the SID. But we know that that one SID is going to link to many last name, first name, and date of birth combinations, which is going to come into play when we start doing the matching process. For criminal history, that SID is the key, and we say sort of because, as most of you are aware of, it is possible. It's not intended, but it's possible for someone to have more than one state ID. APHIS is not absolute. We are sometimes not recognizing new prints that come in, and a new SID number may be assigned. Similarly, for the IDOC record, the IDOC number is a key, sort of. Can we have more than one person with that number? Yes, and it really just comes down to human error and other types of clerical concerns with the data. Our situation involved matching IDOC numbers and SIDs, and an individual could have more than one of each. And what we're doing is choosing one IDOC number and creating a master number that's the parent of all the child numbers when we find that they overlap. So let's talk about this matching process. That's really the theme of what I want to talk about today. And we're talking about this in two senses. We have to initially consolidate duplicate IDOC keys or person records. And then later, we're going to want to match those IDOC numbers to an SID in the criminal history database. And matching can be done in different ways. We generally do deterministic matching, which merely means that we have a set of rules that we follow, and we accept or reject based on those rules. And for us, it's that we're looking for an exact match, if possible, on the last name, the first name, and the date of birth. But we're also going to be looking at partial matches. We have an exact match on the date of birth, but a partial match on the names. The first three letters of the first name and the last name are matching. And when we have that partial match, we're going to be doing some more investigation to make sure that it makes sense on an intuitive and logical level. This is an example of the partial matching, and again, they're evaluated to see if they're reasonable. This slide shows an example where we're matching the IDOC number to the SID in criminal history, but it applies also to this process I'll talk about in a moment about consolidating IDOC numbers. And we'll usually accept the match if we're linking exactly or with the first three letters of last name, first name, and we have an exact match on date of birth. So what we're seeing are acceptable matches on the first and third. In the second, although we do have the exact match on date of birth and on first three letters of first and last name, we're choosing to reject it because it seems as though there are two different genders. Francesca is likely to be a female, while Frank is a male. So our first task is finding duplicate corrections numbers, IDOC numbers, and consolidating them under one parent master IDOC number. So all the IDOC records that have identical keys, identical first names, last names, and birth dates, but have different keys, are located. The non-letter characters are removed, the hyphens and the apostrophes. Now, if the same last name, first name, and date of birth is in place, we're going to pretty much treat these as matches, even if the IDOC number differs. Partial matches are now going to be evaluated, and that's what you have at the bottom of the screen here. And we're going to accept this unless we saw some reason not to logically. So if one of the names instead of Sean was Sharon, we might reject it because we could see that they were two different genders. I'm going to talk shortly about another process that we use in order to identify where we have duplicates of the same person, and that involves checking for overlapping periods of stay in prison. So once these matches are made, a table is constructed. This is the starting point for the database that has the master IDOC number and the related IDOC numbers, the parent and children as we call them. The next table that's needed is the index matching the master IDOC number to the related SID. Now, this process would be a heck of a lot easier if the SID number was embedded in the corrections record. But unfortunately, that's not the case, and that's why we are back to doing our deterministic match based on first name, last name, and date of birth. So we do that, and what we're going to find sometimes is that a master IDOC number may be matched to more than one state ID. And it's a problem, but it's not a terrible problem. And in our case, what we choose to do is to incorporate the criminal history information from both of those state IDs if they match to that master IDOC number. The more serious problem really is when two master IDOC numbers share the same SID, the same criminal history key. We need to figure out if those two master IDOC numbers are the same person or not. So besides checking gender, this is where we can also take advantage of some of the other information that we have available in the DOC database. We can compare the admission dates and exit dates for these two master IDOC numbers. And as you can see, they overlap in their stay. And our conclusion, again, based on logic, is that if they have overlapping prison stays, we're going to say that they're not the same person. So why do we get these SID numbers matching to two different IDOC numbers if we have an exact match based on last name, first name, and date of birth? Well, what's happening is we're probably actually matching to aliases. Don't forget that that's quite common, as you all know. Names are entered each time the person's arrested. In Illinois, we're talking about an average about 12 to 15 arrests when they come into DOC, and a single SID can have, as you see, a number of different combinations of last name, first name, and date of birth, and that's what we found with this particular individual as an example. And when you have that many variations, the chances that we're going to find an exact match, exact quote unquote, for two different unrelated IDOC numbers is pretty good. We have IDOC records in this example, in this area, for Albert Sanders, and we believe this is one person, Leon Leroy Sanders, same DOC number, same date of birth. And when that happens, we're going to do our investigation process, and they're both matching to the same SID. So we need to look into that. It could be that perhaps they're twins or brothers. Maybe they gave the brother's name when they were arrested, and the fingerprints were similar enough that they were given the same SID. But based on the fact that we find that they were in prison at the same time, we're going to conclude that they're not the same people, that they're different people. So now what do? Which master IDOC number are we going to assign that criminal history record information to, that SID? Well, what we've done, and what Mark has done, is to create an algorithm to assign the master IDOC number in a way that uses what we have at our disposal to make that decision. The SID is going to be assigned to the master IDOC number that has the name and date of birth that appears most frequently in that SID number. And in the example that we saw before, Albert Sanders had 1 arrest, with the birth date being the same as in the IDOC file. Leon/Leroy had 7. So that SID is being assigned to Leon/Leroy. And what do we do then with Albert? Well, the person not assigned the SID typically has a different SID that also matched him. And that was the case with Albert. So he got matched to that other SID. And this is just a brief illustration of how we're able to get more matches in recent years, and we believe that that's attributable to the increased use of LiveScan. Let's skip this for now, keep things moving. So once the IDOC and the criminal history records are matched, we have a caseload record that we create. We store it in SQL. This is an example of such a record. It's a person event date. Again, that is anchoring that record. That's going to pertain either to an admission to corrections or a release from corrections for a given individual. This is a summary of some of the things that are in that record. There are other fields as well, length of stay, sentencing date, for example. Now, we're going to aggregate this information so that we can use it for analysis. The first level of aggregation is for each individual person event date. So what you're seeing here is the 101s are the criminal history. Those are prior admissions to corrections, arrests, convictions, and probation sentences. We've separated these out by offense type. The 201s are the post-release events that we'll be looking at for recidivism. This information also stored in SQL. By doing this aggregation right up front, we're able to save some computing time later on rather than doing the analysis off of all the raw individual files. This is the next level of aggregation, and this is the data that we are making available on our website for general inquiries. We are aggregating the data by county and by cohort year. Now, this information is going to be stored in Access in a separate server, and it's for that web-based Access database for public queries. And we want to keep this separate because we don't really want to be mixing the case level data with the aggregate level data on a public server in the event that that information is hacked. This is just an illustration. I'll go through this just quickly, just illustrating that there are data storage issues that will have to get decided depending on how much detail and how large the population is that you're going to be including if you go about doing this type of merge process. If I still have a couple minutes, I'm not sure I do or don't. I don't have the chat screen up, so Stan will have to yell out to me if I'm out of time. I wanted to just show very quickly some of the uses that we've been able to make of the data to answer the policy questions. And initially, so when we talk about prison crowding, does Illinois admit too many nonviolent offenders? And again, it's how you frame that question. And with this tool that we have, we're able to make the important distinction between what a person's admitting offense is versus what their entire body of work is with their criminal history. And the specific question that gets raised to us has to do, and this is, I'm sure, the same as what you're being asked in your states, what about drug offenders? The state's attorneys are telling us that anyone who winds up in prison on a drug offense likely has a lengthy criminal history that includes violent and/or weapons offenses. So using this tool, we can help look into that a little bit. And initially, this is what the data looks like, where at the highest level, we can see how many people are coming in for various offense types. This is the cohort of people coming in on new court admissions, 3 recent years, prison admissions. We can also do cohorts for just technical violators or new court admissions or for prison exits. And very shortly, Mark tells me that we're going to be able to do a cohort of persons sentenced to probation. Now, if we take a look in trying to refine our inquiry here, we can get a look at what the type of criminal history is for all persons admitted. And as you'll see, these numbers are well beyond 100% because people have more than one arrest offense. We are always looking at the most serious charge, though, in any arrest event. At this point, we're able to now not only separate the type of recidivism, the type of previous offense, but what is the cohort grouping. So we can focus now on the admission type of drug offenders. And if we take a look at this number right here, it would seem to validate the state's attorney's claim, showing that about 2/3 of those that were admitted to corrections on drug offenses did have a previous arrest for a person offense, which is a violent offense, and in fact generally had more than 2 of those previous arrests. Looking prospectively at some of the recidivism issues, again, we have a lot of policy implications for sex offenders, and we're trying to come up with strategies because of all the concerns we have about managing sex offenders and where are we going to place them and what sort of treatment do they need. And the claim is that the violent sex offenders are much more prone to recommit a sex offense than other types of offenders, and we took a look at that. And again, it has to do with how the question is framed. So here we ran the cohort grouping for the type of offense a person was admitted to corrections for, and then what was the type of recidivism event that they had. And this is a little busy, so we sort of extracted this out a little bit and culled this. And the answer is sort of yes. The statement that is made by those saying that they have a higher recommitment rate of sex offenses, you could validate that by looking at the fact that if you use odds ratios, violent sex offenders are over 4 times as likely to be rearrested for a violent sex offense compared to drug offenders. However, the percentages really are so small that they can be misleading. Violent sex offenders may be over 4 times as likely to be arrested for a violent sex offense compared to drug offenders, But there's really less than a 3% difference between the proportion that are rearrested, 3.64 versus slightly less than 1. And just to finish up, again, we are expanding our usage of this information. We're starting to do some legislative impact studies as various bills are introduced to introduce more severe penalties associated with unlawful use of a weapon, repeat offenses for prostitution. And this is also becoming the foundation that we're using here for exploring cost-benefit analysis. So once we are able to find the average numbers of various criminal justice events over a long duration, we can monetize those events. What are the costs associated with them, and estimate the costs of recidivism for various types of offenders. And when we apply estimated recidivism reductions and costs for the various programs we're putting in place, we can see if the recidivism costs avoided exceed the program costs. And we're going to continue along those lines. So I'll be happy to take any questions that you might have. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark. We did have one question. I think you probably answered this, but I will ask it anyway and then ask my own little add-on to it, which was whether or not when you do the verification of the matches, whether that's done manually or whether there is some software that you have. And I think I heard you say that something about the algorithm. What I'm wondering is if whether that is something that could be shared with other SACs.
Is done manually. The one area where the algorithm was developed isn't so much the determination of the match, but when we had the situation of making a decision where an SID was shared by more than one corrections record, the algorithm that we had helps assign that master ID to the person that our decision matrix tells us it should be assigned to. So whoever had the most numbers of arrests with the date of birth and last and first name that we have in our corrections record, that's where that SID will be assigned. And that's the type of thing that can be easily automated and turned into an algorithm. And I'm going to ask my colleague here, Mr. Powers, if that is the kind of thing that we would be able to share with people.
Yeah, I think we probably could. The issue would be I would have to provide the algorithm in kind of like a mathematical format, and that would have to be translated into either SQL syntax for your databases or SPSS syntax for your databases and so on. But you could probably figure out what the algorithm is just based on the description. It's just look for the combination of last name, first name, date of birth with the most arrests on that combination.
Great. Thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions. I can give you folks a minute if anybody's got any other questions they want to send to Mark or to Max. Text them to me now or forever hold your peace. All right, not seeing any more questions. I want to thank both of our presenters this afternoon for very informative sessions. I want to remind all of you that if you have other folks, staff members, or other colleagues that are interested in this, we will be posting this webinar on the JRSA website. You can look at the website and look under resources, and you will find a listing for webinars, and hopefully that will be up next week. If not, then the week after. And again, thank you to our presenters. Thanks to all of you for attending. If you have any feedback, I'd love to hear it. Just email me and let me know what you think. If you have ideas for future webinars, we're going to be doing a series of these. Let me know what your ideas are. Thank you all very much and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.